Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Proper Baron, and I'm excited because today we're going to be talking about Victoria 3 and the experience that I had with the game at PDXCON just last week. I was very excited to play the game, of course I jumped right into it, and I think I played about 6-7 hours, something like that, and today I don't just want to tell you about my experience, about my playthroughs and so on. I would also like to, of course, discuss some things that I noticed, discuss some things that I talked with other people about, be they other players or be they developers. Now, before we jump into this, I want to make a couple of things clear, and let me just tape this to my monitor right here. This video is not a review, don't get that wrong. I have, of course, plenty of opinions, I have plenty of thoughts, and I will tell you about all of those, but to really review anything, I think I would have to play about 100, if not more hours. That is, I think CK3 I reviewed at around, let's say, 300, 400 hours, something like this. Royal Court, I had at least 100 hours. The exact number there is not very clear to me, but I hope you understand that when it comes to grand strategy games, I do not want to give a definitive statement. I have not seen, in the version that we had at PDXCON, I have not seen anything even, close to certain regions of the world. I haven't seen anything close to, for example, the second thirds, or rather the second and the third third of the game. I wasn't able to really play those. I wasn't really able to test this. And with that in mind, I would like you to, understand, of course, that I have several opinions here, but that I'm not sure how certain things hold up in certain parts of the world, in certain areas of the playtime, and under certain conditions that I didn't test for. This is important because this is a first impression rather than a review video. Now, the other thing that I also want to sort of bring up here is that I got this wrong when I talked about Paul de Prey's presentation at PDXCON, which was really good. I hope to just cut in some of the slides here that were there. Really good presentation, and I will interweave this into this video as well, because there's just so much in there that was quite fascinating and changed my approach to Victoria 3 ultimately. But don't expect that. I made a mistake there. Don't expect that before release. Let's hope that it comes out soon after release, soon-ish after release. Anyway, Paul de Prey, the QA lead, is of course, I think, a bit busy right now in this period running up to the actual release of the game. The other thing, and the last thing that I want to bring up before we jump in, that everything that you can see here on the left side and that will soon be behind me, I will change to a green screen, and then in the editing phase I will add certain, aspects of gameplay there behind me, but in full screen. None of this is my footage. I was permitted to record, but there was no recording software, so I would have had to film it, with my phone, and I said to myself, that sounds a bit ridiculous. Instead, all of the footage that you can see right here are indeed from the dev stream that was on Tuesday last week. And yeah, that was 4 hours of streaming. The way this will go is that most of the time, basically, this is just visual, sort of, if you want eye candy, right, that will just be running in the background. But at certain points, in particular at the last part of this very video, we will be talking about, for example, UX and whatnot. And at that point, I want to find the parts of the stream where they interacted with those windows, with those menus, and hopefully make it so that you can actually see physical examples of what I'm talking about. I might also, use visual aids if I find it in the editing process in the streams themselves, and then you can, take a look at that while I talk about concepts such as the economy, trade, and so on. But all of that aside, especially for the last part, I think this will be very, very important that you take an actual look at what I'm talking about right there. Now, what is this video actually going to be about? Obviously, it's my first impressions that there are some certain aspects to this. For example, I have 3 main topics that I want to cover in this video. The first one is the general quality of the systems in the game. This means that I will be talking about the economy, warfare, trade, society, politics, diplomacy, right? And I will be talking about those issues together and individually, in the light of the playthroughs that I have done at PDXCON. It's very important, I think, that we talk about this, because Victoria 3 is a very mechanically heavy game. The markets actually, they either work or they do not work, and if they do not work, if something doesn't fit well together, then you're looking at something that is a much bigger faux pas than, for example, in CK3, in Hoi 4, where certain systems somewhat stand alone, they stand on their own. In Victoria 3, I think that is fundamentally different. So we're going to spend some time talking about this, including, of course, the actual playthroughs that I did and what I tested, and trust me, I tested a lot. Amongst the content creators, there was a bit of a conversation there that I was basically spending the entire time with the game. I can assure you that's not true. I talked to so many devs and other, of course, attendees, but I did spend a whole lot at PDXCON, or rather, at PDXCON with the game itself. The second part of this video is sort of something that arises from the gameplay systems, and that is whether the gameplay feeling fits, whether the feeling that you get as you play the game, whether that is something that is enjoyable. Because no matter, you know, let's say you have the perfect system, let's say everything works really well together, it's a great functioning emulation, simulation, just arcadey game, whatever you want to call it, let's put that aside. The fact of the matter is, sometimes there are games that have really bad systems, but they just feel so good, and sometimes there are games that have amazing systems, and they don't quite feel right. I want to talk about this because it's very, very interesting to me. Obviously, when you go to PDXCON and the tickets themselves are $500, and the flight to Stockholm and the hotels, for example, or the hotel prices, right? What you get ultimately are the people that have put a lot of hours into these sort of games. And if they've put a lot of hours into these sort of games, it's a very, very particular demographic that tests the game at PDXCON. And yet, I got some interesting input that I personally wouldn't have recognized this way. I want to say thank you here to everybody that I talked about Victoria 3. I want to bring this up because I think there categorically is a different notion, a different set of content basically when it comes to when do you get the gameplay feeling this is Victoria 3? How do you get it? Why do you get it? What's going on there? Trust me, this will be interesting in particular if you know, have never played a Victoria game. I think this will be very interesting. If you are asking yourself, what is the mindset that I need jumping into that game? That is the second topic right there. And then the third one builds up on the previous two, and that is the question of accessibility and goal understanding. Fundamentally, what I'm talking about there is the accessibility of, hey, am I getting the right data? And do these menus work? What is happening here? Because when it comes to the gameplay feeling, I think that there is a big, big impact that, you know, of course can be mitigated when it comes to designing good enough or designing menus that are good enough. And this has a big, big impact on your gameplay feeling and how you, in general, I think, approach the game, because the game just has that much information. It's crazy, I gotta tell you. It is, and I'm very confident in saying that right now. Whether it works or not, Victoria 3 is the most complex game. I mean, okay, game, it's a bit far. There's, of course, so many roleplay games that are fundamentally different. No, it's the most complex grand strategy game that I have ever played at any given moment. I think that is a fact, or, you know, an opinion at the very least, that I'm very, very confident in. So take that as you may. These are the three topics. Of course, they build up on top of one another. I try to sort of, you know, divide this video into chapters that are sort of independent and yet connected, because as we walk through the gameplay feeling section, I think you will understand why accessibility is at the end right there. Spoilers. Let's just jump into this again. These are the three topics: quality of systems, gameplay feeling, and accessibility. The last thing I think that might be good mentioning is that whenever I look into this general direction, I'm looking at my notes. I usually don't do that. Usually I can just start ranting, I can just start popping off, and there you go, I can just talk about this. But there was so much to consider that this isn't just like the millionth attempt of actually recording this and not going over like 15 hours of video runtime, but this is also now the attempt of recording it where I have the most notes here, just because it really aids me in trying to make the points that I try to make. So with that being said, let's switch over to the other view where this stream right here of the developers is indeed running in the background. It is nice eye candy in certain aspects. I will surely make it so that it's not just random footage, but rather that it follows a certain principle of, you know, hey, I'm talking about X, I'm talking about Y. Let's take a look at that. And yeah, let's just jump into the first topic, the quality of the systems. So, as we jump into the quality of systems conversation, I think that is an incredibly interesting conversation that we have to start by talking about the total sort of comprehensive view onto all the systems together, because that is, of course, how you engage with them. All the systems are interlocked, they are interwoven, and you will be realizing that, I think, fairly quickly into play. We will be talking first. I will tell you what I played, where I played, why I played there, what I tried to do, right? Then I will tell you about my evaluation of these systems together and overall, and then sort of jump into a couple of systems individually, just so that we can talk about that. And I think this is a very, very important discussion indeed, because this game, no matter how we look at it, is fundamentally, I think, a mechanically driven game. And much, much more, for example, than CK3, where in CK3 you could say, and I think this is very fair to say, if you play a Catholic count in Ireland, your general experience and the things that you consider and what you do and what you're motivated by are essentially the same as a Catholic count, for example, in Croatia or Poland. You know, obviously, yes, there are some differences. Are there tribals around? Are there Vikings around? But fundamentally, the mechanical depth is quite confined there. You follow a general corridor. In Victoria 3, I don't think this is true. And let me tell you why. I played a bunch of different nations. I played, for example, Austria. As Austria, I said to myself, I would like to be as reactionary as possible. I would like to be in a situation where I have to deal with very unhappy people, you know, obviously because they're being suppressed, the Hungarians, the other smaller cultural minorities and so on. So that was my Austria approach. As Bavaria, I said to myself, let's just, you know, take a look at Germany. Maybe I can take a look at the South German Federation, and I would simply like to find my place within the Prussian market where we currently, of course, are. That was a very interesting approach, because Bavaria, yes, of course, much, much smaller than Austria, but so fundamentally different. Because, A, if you are being reactionary, you can be reactionary. That's totally cool, because fundamentally there are no suppressed minorities to that degree as they are in Austria. You know, when you look at Bavaria, of course, it's largely South German. Then, of course, there are some Protestants, but the actual acceptance is completely fine, right? So the amount of radicals that stems just from discrimination is basically non-existent in Bavaria, similar to Prussia, for example. Now, I did also play Prussia just a little bit. I was trying out, you know, hey, what can you do here? How can you expand? How aggressive can you be? I was trying all of these systems out, but let's skip that for a second. I played Sweden as well. Sweden is the longest playthrough that I did, I think well into the 1860s. I formed Scandinavia in the 50s and then moved on from there. Scandinavia, I didn't really have a purpose for my society. I just said to myself I would like to industrialize. Of course, as Sweden, you have very few people that you are actively discriminating, or that you can actively discriminate, because most pops are Swedish, until you form Scandinavia, annex Norway, annex Denmark, maybe annex Finland if you were to do that. But until then, it's a fairly relaxed game as well, I think. Definitely one of the recommendable starter nations right there. And the way I played Sweden was fundamentally, I said to myself, okay, obviously I want control of Denmark, but then I want to take a really good look at the combination and the connection between economy, society, and politics. And that was a playthrough. I think we're going to cycle back to that every now and again when we talk about the individual systems in this segment of the video. But quite the fascinating, quite the interesting playthrough right there. I played some Italy. Italy, very, very unique in the sense that you have your own market, in the sense that you don't have all the resources, but you have plenty of things that you do have a competitive advantage on. And that plays very, very differently as well, depending on what you want to do. Although, of course, you know, when it comes to the discrimination, to the issues you face as a society, you are in a more similar spot, I think, compared to Germany than to Austria or any other multicultural realm that does not accept multiculturalism. I also played, I checked out basically all the majors. I looked at their journal entries and so on. I played a little bit of Japan, obviously very unique there with the shogunate issue, with the isolationism and the restoration topic. I checked out the British colonies, I checked out the US, and I went through all of those, and I opened Jan Mayen, of course, how else could it be, which you can release with one pop, but let's put that aside, funny meme. I have to say, when I think back to all of my playthroughs, and let me just check my notes here, when I think about all of my playthroughs, and again, I want to do this basically backwards here, I want to tell you about the sum of systems and what the impression is that those systems left on me, and then I want to talk about individual systems. When I think about my Austria, my Sweden, my Prussia, my Italy, right, what this game has, and this is to be expected to a degree, I think. It's a very, very mechanical game because of how the world is interlocked. But when it comes to this game, I think there's a fundamental line that we have to acknowledge and that we have to draw when it comes to it, that this game already is incredibly unique and allows for unique and different experiences on a purely mechanical level. What I mean here is that, again, CK3, obviously, most of your gameplay is derived, or rather most of the difference in your gameplay is derived out of the uniqueness of your character, and then how that interplays with flavor and potential goals that you have as a player, right? Obviously, sometimes characters are not really something that is coherent with the idea that you have for, you know, your realm. If a character is very lazy, then obviously that doesn't really correspond very well to the idea of forming an empire, for example. CK3 is very, very much driven both by mechanics and flavor, but there's a wide range of areas that are very, very similar mechanically speaking, and mostly are differentiated by the issue of flavor, right? Think, for example, of anybody that is feudal, of anybody that is clan, of anybody that is tribal, right? These systems are so overarchingly similar that most of the different gameplay feeling that you get is because, hey, check it out, you know, I'm, for example, a tribal in Poland. I might interact with some feudals, but also I'm in Poland. That is quite unique, right? Compare that to a tribal in the steppes. You just play it differently, just because the flavor associated with it is differently. This is true, I think, for many other games. Heu4 in many, many ways, and this is because it's a war game and you want to sit down and you want to have competitive war games to a degree, but you fundamentally interact with the mechanics in the same way. You know, you look at numbers in the very same way. I could do this example for any other game as well, but let's continue to Victoria 3, because here, I have to tell you, mechanically speaking, you could have two nations that have zero flavor differences, where you look at them and you go, yeah, that's literally the same thing, right? And you would still have a different approach, you would interpret certain numbers differently, and you would take a different look at what is going on here. The sum of mechanical systems within Victoria 3 brings incredible, incredible diversity and richness to the game itself. I mean, for example, if you jump into two Sicilies compared to Sardinia, Piedmont, obviously, they're both Italian, they're both fairly homogeneous when it comes to their makeup, there's very little discrimination going on there, right? And they both even may have similar goals, but the difference in mechanical systems, or rather how you interact with them, there is astonishing. And obviously, you start with very different laws, you know? You have the Bourbons in the south, you have the, whatever they're called, the Piemontese in the north. The point here, what is the noble house of Italy that became the royal house? I'm not sure. The point is that you look at these two nations, and the difference starts, for example, with whatever their natural resources are. What are you looking at? Can you build up an industry with them? Can you go on and maybe sell these sort of things? Can you manufacture something with the resources, sell that to other nations, or vice versa, right? Trade alone, economic capabilities and competitiveness alone, the societal makeup on a cultural, a religious, a wealth level, right? Whoever holds the power. All of these things are so interlocked that if you change a minor thing in a country that otherwise is very, very similar to the other country that you're looking at, you will have a different interpretation of gameplay values and of gameplay mechanical interactions. I mean here, for example, that when you look at Bavaria, or let's look at Prussia, for example, right? When you look at Prussia is a fairly homogeneous country. Obviously, you have the situation of the suppressed Poles in the east and whatnot, but it's fairly homogeneous. You are in a very strong position. You have a pretty large market, right? You have the Zollverein going on, and that, of course, gives you quite the variety of resources that you can interact with. You have a good population that works on the subsistence farms that makes it so that you can expand, that you can build up. You're not limited by a population per se. Very similar. All of these things are very similar, right, to Austria-Hungary, or well, to Austria, I should say. But the sheer difference that lies in the fact that Austria starts with all of its minorities suppressed, right? Czechs, Slovakians, Croatians, Slovenians, Hungarians, Romanians, and Polish, for example, whatever I may be forgetting here. The point here is that Prussia can exist just going forward. You can just do your things, right? You evaluate this, you say, okay, I would like to build up my coal, yada, yada, yada. As Austria, initially, you will immediately get an uptick in radicals that basically are a ticking time bomb, because they are being suppressed. Now, does that mean they will rebel immediately? Does that mean you will see a cultural secession right away? Obviously, it doesn't. But now, as Austria, which Prussia doesn't even have to consider because none of this plays a role for Prussia, but now as Austria, you're looking at a situation where you have to think about the fact, hey, wait a minute, I could give these cultural minorities rights, which would make them happy. I could make them wealthy, which is a risky bargain, because they could become wealthy enough that all of a sudden they are important and could lobby for themselves, or, you know, potentially start a revolution. And if I give them certain territories, you know, where I say, okay, here are jobs, here are factories, all of a sudden, if they were to rebel, if I were to lose them, my industrial core would be gone. I could alternatively, I could just, you know, suppress them even further, institute more suppressive laws, more oppressive laws, and make it so that all the industry is settled in the areas where my pops live that support my state, my society, which are, of course, the German-speaking pops. This is a decision that is derived from the fundamental change or difference in makeup on a societal level in Austria that is not present in Prussia, that is not really present in France, in Great Britain, and so on, and it gives you a unique tree of decision-making in Austria, in, for example, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is even more intense because literacy is down, which means the access to your qualifications isn't quite there. You are in a much more difficult spot because not only do you have the cultural and religious issues that, of course, Austria is also facing, but you have an even more difficult time actually building things up. This is something that I think can't be stressed enough. Victoria 3 has flavor differences. Again, the Ottomans with the Tanzimat, we have the Austrians with a journal entry for Hungary, we have, if you play Prussia, for example, and you face a revolution, or a revolution is close to triggering, you will get a journal entry that says the Spring of the Peoples, and that will rather guide you, I should say, to become more reactionary or to become Republican. It will change the makeup of your IG leaders, yada yada yada. There are so many differences in flavor in especially the bigger nations, but what I can tell you right now, and this was incredibly exciting when I saw it in action, is that the design of interlock mechanics in Victoria 3 adds a mechanical difference between nations that are otherwise incredibly similar that other games cannot achieve. They cannot achieve this. My best example, actually, in this, in my opinion, is, for example, Stellaris. Stellaris is an outstanding game. I'm a huge fan of it. Play it on my off time, basically, whenever a new DLC comes out, I play it with my friends, you know, that sort of stuff. Big fan, but as it is designed fundamentally as a 4X game, you're looking at a situation where even the most different, mechanically speaking, nations and civilizations and empires will have a certain tree structure of decision-making to it because you can't avoid it. You need certain things. You interact with the market in certain ways. You interact with the galactic community in certain ways. You interact with expansion, with exploration, with migration in certain ways that fits an archetype. In Victoria 3, depending on where you start, depending on where you want to go, you will be making interesting and different and meaningful decisions. This is actually something I think that before we go into the individual systems, so what I just gave you was, I played Austria, for example, right? Now, I played it in a very reactionary way, because what I explained earlier, where you have all these different options of how do I get rid of this massive amount of radicals, right? I said to myself, I'm going to do that by being reactionary. I will suppress it. I will make sure that they do not have the power, that they do not get any say of it, right? And I'm going to do this by strengthening the Germans as much as I can, so that I have a power base there that can finance me and aids me in suppressing the units around me. Of course, as an autocracy, you can also have decrees then that get rid of certain things, you know, certain impacts of unrest, that sort of stuff. Anyway, my point here is, or radicals, I should say. My point here is that when you play this game, you should always, and we're gonna get more to this when it comes to the gameplay feeling and the accessibility as well, but you should always look at your country. Obviously, you need to spend some time familiarizing yourself with the situation you're in, and you should make sure that you understand where you are. Right? This is just simplified. I think ultimately where you are is a 3D scale, a 3D measure where you have to place yourself compared to all the other countries when it comes to societal makeup, to literacy rate, to wealth, to industrialization, to resources, to political makeup, to laws. All that stuff will influence where you are. And when you play Victoria 3 more so than in any other game, let's say for example you play CK3 in France as a count. Hey, honestly, if you've played a count in Poland in CK3, you're gonna have pretty much everything you need to know about being a count in France. Right? Iberia these days is different, but I hope you get where I'm coming from. In Victoria 3, in the base game, in 1.0, where you are on this scale, when you determine this, is vital. So that you can then know where you can go and where you might want to go. What I mean here is that the choice that I made, where I said, Austria is right here, and I want to become the reactionary Metternich masterwork, right? You would place yourself right here. This is the path that you need to make if you want to make it there. If you want to become multicultural, you would end up over here. This is a mechanical difference in how you play this game that is incredibly exciting. The changes you are making to your laws, to where you place industries, to what production methods you might be using, to what sort of trade routes you encourage. You know, for example, trade routes that make the life of the poorest very easy so that they stop rebelling, you know, that sort of thing. That will be fundamentally different dependent on where you start and where you're going on a pure mechanical level, flavor entirely aside. This is basically an endorsement, I think, of what I have seen when playing Victoria 3 and how the systems interlock. What you can't shake with Victoria 3 at any given point, much more so than any other grand strategy game, much more so than Victoria 2, which had some untraceable some very traceable, I should say, weaknesses in its connectivity between the systems. Victoria 3 closes those weaknesses. At first, you should always be looking at your economy, because with your economy is also where you make up, you know, where your society is going. If I build certain buildings, all of a sudden certain subsistence farmers who pick up those jobs will make more money, will be able to buy more, right? That is a fundamental shift that begins in the economy and then moves into the society. And from the society, now that those people are no longer subsistence farmers, they may become politically active, they may support different things depending on what job they fill in the actual factory. You will then also, from the economy to the society into the political world, change the makeup of your nation, which then lets you change certain laws, which sets you up for certain, for example, technological advances, for certain diplomatic actions. And there's a lot of balancing, I think, that has to be done there. But, you know, for example, if you're very reactionary and you look at a guy that is socialist, you're not going to be working with them. The difference there is that, of course, it starts in your economy, goes through your society, goes into your politics, and then on the diplomatic level, they look at you and are like, nah, I hope my communist country here will not be working with you because you kind of are a monarchy, right? This is an angle of complexity that you do not see in any other game at launch. I mean, that's for sure, and I would even say in any other game as it is. I don't know where these systems balance-wise, you know, your economic decisions, where they end up in the last 2/3 of the game, but in the first third of the game, I was incredibly impressed by how different a strategy of a country would be that otherwise is so similar to its neighbor, but differs, for example, on the issue of where it started with its resources, where it started with its cultural minorities, that sort of thing, right? It's incredible to see that difference on a purely mechanical level. Like, I can tell you this, obviously, if you play Sokoto, you have much less flavor than if you play the United States of America, because there are certain areas of the world that the developers know will be played more often. Obviously, any of the great powers or the, you know, big winners of the 20th century will have a lot of flavor. But the reality remains that Sokoto is so unique in its makeup on a cultural, on a religious, on a societal, on a political, on an economic level, on a tech level, right? That you will be doing different steps compared to any comparable country that is not Sokoto. Very, very exciting stuff. Now, that was my feedback, my opinion on the question of the systems as they work together. I will tell you, I have tested the individual systems. I sat down, for example, and I started a world war as Austria, where I called in all the great powers I could call in on my side, and then my opponent Prussia would call in all of the great powers that they could call in on their side, because it fully escalated, right? When it comes to diplomacy and to war, which are the two systems that I would like to talk about first when it comes to the individual systems, obviously, those stand a bit more isolated because they are external, right? Diplomacy, economy, society, and politics, for example, and trade as well, to a degree. I think trade is more connected, but economy, society, and politics, they are all internal. You largely care about these things on your own level. Diplomacy and war connect to all of this, and this is actually... So I have praise, and I have complaints about the warfare system. Hear me out here, right? I started this world war. And it's already questionable whether that world war should be occurring the way it is, right? But I started that world war. And I think that on a warfare level, let's just bite this, or let's bite into this sour apple. Let's talk about warfare here. I think what I experienced, both with that Austria thing, but also when I played Sweden, when I played, for example, in Italy, right? When I played Bavaria. And I engaged in warfare. It has to be, there are two things here, fundamentally. Warfare in Victoria 3, much like all the other mechanics in Victoria 3, is much more tightly connected to all other mechanics. Think about Victoria 2. In Victoria 2, obviously your warfare capabilities, much like in any other grand strategy game, are sourced from your internal gameplay. EU4 even does it. EU4 is quite arcadey, is meant to be arcadey, right? But you source your manpower, and how much manpower there is from certain things that are within your nation. Victoria 2 does the same thing, of course. It looks at soldier pops, blah, 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 blah. You know the drill, then you can recruit, and so on and so forth. But Victoria 2 let you disconnect certain systems. What I mean here is that, and you know where I stand on the micro issue, But what I mean is, and I can already tell, by the way, this video is going to be way too long. My apologies on that. But when it comes to warfare, in Victoria 2 and any other micro-based system, you look at the situation and the calculation of what does this war cost? How much am I willing to pay? Can I carry out this war? You look at this from a very different angle, because a big chunk of how you do at war is based on your ability to know how to micro in any given game. In CK3, quite frankly, you know, very, very simple, of course, very, very basic, because you generally will run around with one army, depending on the size and, you know, depending on where you go there. But, for example, CK3, if you understand how the penalties work, you will be able to bait people to fight you. In CK3, for example, let's say you are roughly equal to your opponent, but your opponent, you know, hey, if they do attack you in the hills right here, they will lose that battle. What do? Of course, you take away a commander. You take a commander off of the army, and the AI goes, hey, wait a minute, I can march in there right now, I can win this. And then when they're locked in, you go, hey, my commander's back, how did that happen? What a world, isn't it? And that's how you can win there. Now, I personally would call that cheese. I know that cheese is something that people sometimes are allergic to, not just because of lactose, but to the term, right? I want to keep it neutral. It's whether that is cheese or not. I mean, yeah, okay, whatever. What I'm saying is, the tiny tricks that one learns when engaging in micro-warfare actually disable the connection between the underlying system that generates your war capabilities, which is, for example, your population in Victoria 3, and your economy and how you can equip them and so on, right? It disables this connection because you can avoid any consequence that logically should follow by being good at micro. Now, I understand, and I don't want to push this away in any way whatsoever. I understand people have fun with that. I had a lot of fun, right? I'm tired of it at this point, but I had a lot of fun with it. I recognize this. The reality of Victoria 3, since warfare, fundamentally is now a question of, can I supply these troops? Can I disrupt my enemy's supply? Do I have enough troops? Are they equipped? What am I looking like if I win this war, but I have, for example, now a much, much higher ratio of dependents that aren't earning enough money, bringing down the standard of living, making it so that overall radicals in my nation will form. These are the questions that you will now ask with war. And that is so, so much better. Instead of having basically this tool where you can escape the consequences, you now have to ask yourself, am I willing to actively carry the war cost as it is? Can I make the cost lower by, for example, changing production methods, by harassing enemy supply lines, by, you know, for example, destroying their convoys? Can I make it so that other people come into the Diplo place so that they don't even need to wage the war? These are the questions that you now have at the forefront of your mind. Can I make it so that I can support my industry, that I can pay for all of this? How deep into debt can I go before this war isn't worth it? These are questions that a society simulated like Victoria 3 ought to ask, and it is asking them. I am very ecstatic about that. I have to tell you this outright. I think once you grasp that warfare is driven by being connected to economy, society, politics, to trade, right? Once you grasp that, I think, you're looking at a situation where this warfare system really shines. The negative about the warfare system. I mean, I said this ages ago, right? That I think it would be nicer if we had, for example, a behind-the-scenes sort of structure where, you know, the interest groups, for example, they connect a bit more into the military academies, that you have a military academy, and they take a closer look at the idea of, okay, how do militaries arrive at whatever doctrine, whatever production methods they are utilizing? How do they choose certain generals and certain commanders in general? You know, when you look at, for example, at the French, how they viewed warfare, especially after losing the 1870-1871 conflict against Germany. That is something that I'm missing, without a doubt. I'm not really missing, like, giving area commands. I can see why it would be appealing to people. I just think that it wouldn't add all that much, because fundamentally the questions that you're asking is, can I support this on an industrial level, right? That's more the questions that you and your enemy are asking yourselves as you start a war. The thing, however, and we will return to this several times, I think, in the third aspect of this video. The thing, however, that needs to be pointed out is that once you are at war, the values that you should be studying, such as, oh, how many losses are we taking? Am I losing this front because they have old battalions? Should I change the production methods to a worse production method at a different front that I'm not losing, so that I can then change the production method at this front line, catch up, and potentially hold them there, whereas the other front line just isn't all that important, right? Those sort of decisions that directly tie war back into econ society politics, they can't be made with the UI that warfare is accompanied by. It's the flow of information in warfare is so difficult to follow that I think warfare stumbles over itself. I think warfare is neatly connected. It's really nice. I think has certain ways that could enhance it, right? For example, again, the military academy thing, maybe refueling stations for ships, yada yada yada. But I gotta tell you, when you go to war, when you went to war at the PDXCON, version of Victoria 3, the UI will not give you a lot of leeway. It's just bothersome, annoying. You can tell that like a lot was tried, but I don't think that this currently does it in a way where I felt good playing it. It mostly, I was just like, yeah, I don't really want to like comb my way through all these different windows, especially if you have multiple fronts, especially if you need to analyze multiple generals, that sort of stuff. Yeah, I've been a bigger fan of other interfaces, is basically what I'm saying there. Other than that, I think warfare is nicely interwoven there, which brings us to diplomacy, because diplomacy is a really well-connected issue. Sometimes, and this brings me to my Bavaria playthrough actually, again, as Austria, I had that war against Prussia, and I was just like, I don't really want to interact with these fronts. It's just, it doesn't give me the information that I need, and I'm not combing it over for that, right? With Bavaria, I try to not do war. I try to be very diplomatic. I wanted to form the SGF, which is a decision that you, a journal entry that you get after researching nationalism, if I'm not mistaken here. And I said to myself, I would like to bring Baden and Württemberg into the fold without going to war with them, right? That's a bit difficult. You can't really make somebody else fall into line with the tools that I had available in the game that I played. I got news, I don't know any of the specifics, but I have been told that basically getting other nations to fall in line to make it easier for you to, basically get your sphere to be larger diplomatically is something being looked into, including, for example, the question of how do I get Württemberg and Baden to agree with me being the SGF? In Germany, it's very easy. In Germany, fundamentally, the German unification is very simple because they will side with somebody, right? If you're a great power, you are one of the unification candidates, which makes it so that Baden and Württemberg could say, Bavaria, we got great relationships, let's do it. Why don't you do it, right? And then, yeah, you can form Germany if you get the full support. With the SGF and the NGF, so the South German Federation and the North German Federation, that's not the case, because those are entries, those are journal entries, those are not actual unification plays, making it so that that principle doesn't apply. You need to use basically the standard diplomatic options that you have when you try to take things over. I had a frustrating game there, largely because I was doing great as Bavaria. I had a great time really expanding, really like checking out my position in the market, and then I got the decision, okay, or rather I got the journal entry and I looked and I was like, okay, wait a minute, so I need Baden-Württemberg. And in this case, it was actually even more specific, since the Hohenzollern hold the southern area in Württemberg, right? Württemberg doesn't even fully count. You would have to take Alsace-Lorraine to get the requirement satisfied on this issue. Like, you have to go to war no matter what you do, right? And that's a bit, it feels a bit odd, felt a bit off. Would have liked it as well, I didn't see that either, for Austria to be capable of basically ripping German miners out of the Zollverein, moving them into your position, and then, much like the UK can unify Canada and Australia and such, doing that but for the SGF. I would have liked that, I didn't see that. But anyway, I think diplomacy in general feels really good. Especially because there's a capacity, so many pacts that you do, of course, rely on that diplomatic capacity, and that gives you a fairly fluid approach to diplomacy, because you choose what you invest that capacity in, and it's a steady thing rather than, I need to accrue 200 points. Capacities feel pretty good, and you can notice that in diplomacy as well. The one thing that I do want to mention on diplomacy is that diplomatic plays, I think, and this is always a tweaking of the UI, right, of the AI. When you look at diplomatic plays, you say, okay, I would like this guy on my side because they're really neat and they're really nice. Oh, sorry, one thing I skipped for warfare was actually that, of course, the AI, since this, I believe, was the same build as the one running right here, they liked naval invasions, man. They loved naval invasions. Whenever I called France in on the Austrian, for example, World War, you know, Great Britain would be on the other side, and France would always invade the home counties every single time without fail. Yeah, they would do that rather than... It's an AI thing, but on the diplomatic play level, I think the only big thing... Diplomatic plays function really nicely. They are very nice. They're very cool to interact with. Something that I would like. If I'm Austria and I say, hey, Russia, please aid me, there's a pretty good chance that Russia would say, you know what? I'm gonna throw my full weight around for you. Yeah, you're Austria. You're one of the big guys. I understand, right? Something that I would personally like is the idea where, especially if you're not a great power, that sort of thing, or if it's just a minor, if it's a regional conflict between two non-GPs, right? That when you call somebody else to your side in a diplo play, that depending on how much you offer them, let's say, for example, I offer a different nation an obligation and trade rights, right? Let's say I offer that. That nation may offer, okay, you know what, for those two things, we give you 50% of our capacity. We will assign 50% of our military capacity to your front lines. If they are under pressure themselves, if there's other things going on, right? Obviously, that might change. They may not be able to or willing to offer all that much. This is a complex system that I don't have a full design for, but my point is that it feels kind of weird when you are a minor nation, you have a minor conflict, and you're like, you know what, let's call Britain in, and Britain is like, hell yeah, brother. I will do whatever it costs. I will mobilize 1 million men if necessary. And it feels a bit weird. If instead they could be like, you know what, you get 10%. I'll give you 10%. That's it. You give me an obligation, I'll give you 10% of of my military power. I would like that just because it would give diplomatic plays more weight away from the great powers. Because it might be better to call in a smaller nation that just by default says 100% is coming to town, compared to France saying here's like 15 units because you're not that much. You're not worth that much to me, right? Yeah. I would like some sort of tiered invitation system where you can secure a certain amount of troops. I think I would like that. But currently, diplomatic plays, other than that, are very, very cool. I think it's the coolest way of declaring a war because it acknowledges that there's always a pre-play to something, a preparation, of course, to this, where everybody's aware this is going to happen. Some border skirmishes might be nice, like in that time period, that some actions of war are already being taken, but I hope you know where I'm coming from here. Those systems, really cool, obviously a bit attached. The systems that work marvelously together are econ, society, politics, and trade. Just really good. I think it's the tightest connection of anything that you could possibly ask for. Again, depending on your resources, on your societal makeup, on your political makeup, you will be taking different decisions, and the mechanics directly give way to this. They are really well designed when it comes to the question of how do they interlock and how do you get from A as a nation, how do you get from A to B, because you need to consider your econ, how that influences your society, how that influences your politics. I even played around with some stuff. I love this. I'm a role player at heart, right? And you know that at some point in a country, things just go down. You know, things just aren't doing all that well. I would do such things such as the Silesian Weaver revolt, right? I would attempt as Prussia to basically neglect them there and to drive them out of business myself and make them angry. You can do these things. That interplay exists. It's really, really cool. Seriously, just a big fan of the way they structured the connectivity between these systems. When it comes to the economy, I think I don't have too many negative things to say. Obviously, there will be, I think, until the day we all die, there will be a debate about could there be more goods? Are there some goods that are trivial? Are there certain, for example, political interactions that don't feel right? Where like either this law doesn't do what you might think it does, that sort of thing. I think that will always be there. These are like day-to-day business things, but yeah, the actual interplay is really solid, and you can see the immediate effect of you, for example, building up, let's say, certain mines or farms or fabric works, right? You can see the fact that you are changing your economic setup is changing fundamentally your society. I was looking at certain interest groups and I said to myself, I want those smaller. And the immediate step that you take is you look at, okay, who supports these interest groups? Then you identify what industries they are, whether you can have a more advanced production method to kick a bunch of the people out that are in that interest group that you don't like, that sort of thing. Whether you might want to like take it slow, make it so that, you know, you don't support a certain region, that sort of thing. And how that turns out on the economic level then. So basically, like, the economy influences society, then influences politics, and you're looking at a really nice interplay there. It's just very complex. I know, how could you have seen this coming, right? It's just very, very complex. You can't underestimate that. There was some cool flavor when I played in particular, you know. I sadly didn't see any of the expeditions. Veronica wrote those expeditions. She's now on CK3. Big win, let's go. And the expedition is supposedly really good content. At least, I mean, that is what I was told by the CK3 team. So ultimately, it might just be internal CK3 propaganda. But I didn't get to see those, but I saw so many other events. The presentation is really nice. The fact that you don't get plastered with those events, but instead they pop out on the side, and then you can decide whether you want to interact with them or whether the default thing is just meant to happen, that sort of stuff. Really good. The other thing, I guess, the quality of the systems, because this is a visual system, but it's a system. The living map is astonishing. It is incredible. The landscape of Victoria's map does not in any way beat Imperator Rome. It does not. I will tell you this outright. The quality of the depiction of your nation, your society, your economy, your wars on the map is beautiful. Absolutely insane. And I know what you're gonna say. Oh, but I'm here to look at the numbers. I don't care whether there's a pretty... I gotta tell you, when I was building my my railways, I zoomed in. I was like, I'm gonna see those railways pop up. When I went and I had a playthrough where I attempted to keep an entire region basically poor and repressed, have other regions built up, you know, as a very autocratic realm where you want to keep the standard of living generally fairly far down, right? Your cities look so different from cities that are rich, that are generally inhabited by rich pops. It's incredible. They said something really fitting there, I think, at the panel at Victoria 3, where, since it is a game that is very much inwards focused, that is focused on your society, they want to give you a map painting adrenaline boost when you build up your society, comparable to when you blob. Obviously, in Victoria 3, you can still blob. You look at your nation, you go like, that's me right there. I just conquered that state. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? The map does give you adrenaline. It does give you serotonin. Where you look and you're like, that's exactly right. That's the society that I'm building. This dirt-riddled garbage dump, right? Where I suppress my population. Or this happy place where everybody's earning a pretty good amount of money. I think they nailed it there. Again, as Bavaria, I, for example, encountered a shortcoming where I couldn't really expand my sphere of influence, which isn't like a game concept, but, you know, obviously, like, it's a mechanical idea, right, where you sit down and say, these are under my influence. I couldn't really expand it. I was limited to what I wanted to do. I think there are certain things where systems could be more tightly, more neatly connected, right? There are some things where you can't really tell how they're connected, and I think this is a major wrench thrown into your gameplay sort of a dynamic, right? But in many, many more ways than other grand strategy games, Victoria 3 connects the dots where I did not think the dots would be connected. Let me see what else I have here, by the way. Lack of resources, right? I know I mentioned this before, but let me just bring this up again. I would always recommend playing early on a fairly small nation that doesn't have all the resources, so that you start interacting with the trade system, not as a hegemon, but as somebody that just needs to trade for things, that wants to export things, right? That sort of thing. Not having all resources is insanely cool, because it gives you an immediate, a short-term, a mid-term sort of expansion goal, and it makes it so that you engage with the trade system on a fairly eye-to-eye level. The Diplo plays, we talked about the limitations for aid, you know, if, like, you have a tiny conflict, you probably don't need 130 battalions coming from France, right? That sort of thing. Warfare, again, what I wasn't able to test is a lot of sort of overseas warfare for the purposes of, you know, when you start warfare, the best experience at PDXCON was definitely just a pure land border warfare, because otherwise the AI would go like, oops, I just invaded you. Oops, I decided I should invade Sweden. Wait, but who are you? I am Greece. There's some interactions there, right, where it's just difficult to test. Now, trade in itself, the way they structured it, where you do a trade route, and then that route will contract and expand as it sees fit on a profit level. Very good. I think also, much like warfare there, struggles a lot with the interface, but we're going to talk about that in a second. That is written there. Trade. Good. Consider obligations. Oh yeah, by the way, what I need to tell you is do make sure that you consider who you give obligations to. The AI was ruthless in adding me to their market, in making sure that I joined their wars. They were not stupid about it. I thought it's like EU4 where, you know, like it's yeah, whatever, right? It's like CK3. No, it is not. They will use those obligations without a doubt. Let's see, is there anything else? I tried a bunch of things. I started a couple of world wars. I tried to isolate some nations economically. I like the approach, and again, here it comes just in how, like, warfare with its new system, even though the system again was like, the AI was very wacky in what it did when it started invading everybody. But I really enjoy the way Victoria 3, especially when we compare this to Stellaris, which is the closest comparable, I think, peace deal creation. I liked the way the peace consensus would come to terms with all of the negotiating parties slowly but surely. Oh, you know what, my war support is down so far, I'm gonna accept this deal now. I'm gonna drop this war goal, screw it, it's out of here, right? I think there's a lot to like about that, because you can see your society and your enemy society, depending on whether they have the war goal or not, depending on whether they're doing well, depending on what their losses look like, right? Slowly but surely being like, bro, I want to get out of here. That is an approach to warfare that, for example, is completely lacking in CK3. Stellaris sort of does it the other way around, where you desperately need to basically carpet siege them. In Victoria 3, you really do not need to do that. You could not take a single piece of land and then get a satisfying peace deal if you just whittled them down enough. If their society is unwilling to keep fighting, you are in a really good spot. What else we got here? Right, let's talk about the economy. Is there anything I really want to talk about here? Incredibly complex. The outcome, yeah, that is actually something that is fascinating. There's so many steps, and we talked about this when we talked about the dev diaries. In the economic system, and particularly for Victoria 3, there are plenty of shortcuts, right? There are situations, I mean, they talked about it on stage as well at the dev panel, where they talked about previously nations being basically made up of small regional markets. Think like the trade nodes that exist in, for example, I think a good example are the Muscovian, right? The Muscovite areas there in general, you know, like how it is. And then sooner rather than later, as you connect these areas, as you bind them together via like rail and whatnot, they become one market. At the start of the game, as it is now implemented, Russia, the Tsardom of Russia, is just one market, right? Certain areas are underconnected, certain areas, if you build up anything and then more goods need to go from the market capital to there and vice versa, all of a sudden, you know, can't actually do that. You can't maintain that sort of connection. The economy makes sort of some trade-offs there in certain places, but the outcome, I think, once you understand the cause and effect relationship, the outcome is incredible. It feels good, where you look at it and you go, that makes sense. We can't get the goods that these people want in anymore, so all of a sudden they need to spend more money to do certain things, right? And that means their standard of living goes down. They might get angry about this. I have to react to this. Conversely, of course, you're looking at a situation where you say to yourself, okay, I have a market right here. I'm subsidizing this circumstance right there, and I actually don't like these people. They you know, for example, I don't know, they're intelligentsia. I don't want to see them anymore. Get them out of here. What do? Of course, you know, there's only really one answer here. You slowly but surely, you starve them out. You make them lose the power less and less, right? There are certain connections here, I think, that all other games, including Victoria 2, it comes down to the world market yet again. It comes down to the fact that the factories are staffed by the same general archetype of who staffs factories. You know, for example, that when you have an army, your army is staffed by the same pops, you know, every single nation you play in Victoria 2. In Victoria 3, depending on the production method, all of a sudden you got engineers walking around there, right? It's very, very different approaches in how the economy connects to itself and connects to, for example, warfare, to trade, and so on. Really cool stuff what they did. I think system-wise, again, there are some shortcomings, as I said earlier, especially in the Bavarian example, but I was very, very impressed with how diverse the pure mechanical choice was that you could have. Again, starting as Bavaria versus starting as, for example, any other small comparable nation, like any of the Italians, you know, that are quite homogenous, but they have a completely different makeup on a resource level, on an education level. And all of a sudden, boom, you're looking at mechanical flavor that does not exist this way in other games. I was very, very impressed by how well these systems connected. Let me see here. Info overload can definitely happen at times in the economy. We're gonna get to that more in a second. I have so much to complain about there. but I do want to make this clear as well. I'm making this video based on what I want to talk about. I did not tell them what would be in any video I would make based on this game, but I kind of told them because I talked so much to Victoria 3 devs, and I was complaining a lot, because, I mean, you know, that's the point, right? I was giving them my opinion, and I think they already know, basically, ultimately, right? But hear me out here. So that is blah, blah. Right, once you become familiar with the systems, even if you have info overload, once you understand what you need to look for, it will become manageable. That is definitely the experience that I had. And the effect and cause model is traceable if you have started sort of becoming familiar with the systems. To sum it up, in their sum, the systems of Victoria 3 are more connected than any system of any other goddamn grand strategy game that I have ever played. The underlying systems connect neatly to the layers that you as a player actually interact with. I think this is very, very good. It's also bad if you are not familiar with what is going on, if it's difficult for you. We're going to get to that in a second again. But all in all, I think it's undeniably true that these systems are incredibly well connected. Individually, the systems, for example, Diploplay and War, I think are difficult in certain areas. Again, Diploplay is generally really, really cool. Just the issue of, like, everything can become very, very big, and there's a lot of balancing that if you don't get that right, it can, you know, go really, really poorly in terms of, like, how the game feels. But economy, society, and politics, they all stand on their own, and they are all layers that, when you interact with them, and you have a rough understanding of the other layers, you will look at that and go, oh yeah, okay, so this means that in the economy now, certain things will change. We are looking at different outcomes there. I am largely very positive in my impressions of these systems. Trade, for example, I know was a huge question for many, many people that said to themselves, basically, it's just going to be this babysitting minigame. When it comes to that, I did not have the feeling that I had to babysit any of this stuff for the game. Be it trade, be it the economy. Obviously, there's a lot to do in the economy, but in general, you will be changing production methods when you get new tech, or when you are in a crisis situation. Say, for example, you're looking at a point in time where you're at war, and all of a sudden goods that are used in a certain industry that is important, but not as important as the wartime economy, you might change the production methods, right? And in general, you can do that fairly quickly, fairly easily with like just one button that changes all buildings in your nation that have this. But yeah, there's a lot of configuration possible there. You can babysit it, you can squeeze out the last cent out of your industry there, basically. But in general, I very much have to say, I think that as soon as you understand the underlying systems, you can take some general steps and you will know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Yeah, that is basically how I would judge these systems individually and together. Largely positive, largely very positive, I should say, with some drawbacks. And yet, there's a difference, right? Between having a good system, a system that is cool, a system that you might like, that works well together with others, and the general gameplay feeling that people have. Right now, I'd like to take a look at the thoughts that I myself have on this issue, and that I learned from developers and from other players. So let's start out with that. So, this next segment here, the gameplay feeling, is actually one that I find very, very interesting because it is something that I had to think about a lot to really come to making any points, right? I was considering so many different angles. I was trying to understand what it could be and how it could be alleviated and how you might want to approach the situation to not be trapped in what I'm going to be telling you about in a second. I wanted to make this its own segment in this video because it's just, I think it's very, very vital that when you have a game that is this complex, when you have a game that is this unique in what it does, you might have to take basically a meta point of view, no matter where you are coming from when you are actually playing the game. A meta point of view that can guide you into a direction that basically will make you really like explore the game from an angle that you may have not done. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I played Victoria 3 and then I had an interesting time. I explored all the systems. It was the first time I had my 1.5 hour slot. Basically, you have a 1.5 hour slot at PDXCON. You sign up, you show up, you start playing for 1.5 hours, and then you leave. I did, and I assume many others did this as well. It wasn't really frowned upon, but anyway, I would just like sort of, hey, is there still a slot open? Let me just sit down. Oh, wow, what a coincidence. And then I would just keep playing. But I just finished that, and I was talking to a different content creator, really great content creator, very experienced, put so many hours into so many grand strategy games. Really, really cool. And our reactions were very different. I was playing the game and I said to myself, okay, I see, you know, like this and that. I don't like this or that. I don't like that, blah, blah, blah. But all in all, I mean, these systems just incredible. And I was talking to them and they said, I can't tell you whether this is a good or a bad game because I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what I'm trying to do, where I'm going to go. And it's really, really interesting. I want to call this, I think, this situation, the Victoria 3 reactivity trap. It's such a different perspective, and I believe it is largely coined by a perceived circumstance reactivity necessity that you need to be reactive, you need to react to the circumstances around you, that leads to gameplay and to an experience that feels odd, that feels off, but can't be pinpointed by the people that are playing it. Let me explain what I mean here. I said this at the very start, at the very introduction. I said that there can be games that have amazing systems, but then people engage with them and are like, what the hell? I mean, I don't know what any of this is. What is this, right? And I think Victoria 3 has potential to fall into this trap. When I sit down and I say to myself, my country's right here, I want it to be over there, let's get this done. I have a clear game plan, and the more you play, the more I play, the more do I find which buttons, which sort of levers I move, I press, I touch, right, that make it so that I facilitate this move. That is what I would describe as the gameplay loop as intended. I think Victoria 3 is so complex, and I think this will be something that will accompany the game for years and years and years to come. It's inevitable. But Victoria 3 is so complex that if you are unable to recognize where your country is, where you would like it to go, and find the levers that make you go there, even if you miss half the levers, if you find any, it moves into the right direction, right? But I think Victoria 3 is so complex that more than any other game, you as a player are at risk of not being able to even identify where your country is, where your country's going, and so on and so forth. I think a big change, or rather what made me realize this, that I felt this way, was the Paul Dupre talk. And I know I keep going off about this talk that none of you have access to, and I only have these slides right here that that have been taken, these photos have been taken with my phone camera, right? But Paul Dupre's talk, I think, was a huge aid to anybody in that room that didn't understand at the time how to identify the status quo in their country. So let's say, for example, you start as Austria, right? I think there's an incredibly high chance that if you're new to the game, if you maybe even are new to the genre, and we have to think so far, that you look at Austria, and you go like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll build up some stuff here, I'll do some stuff. And then you see all these radicals pop up because they're being suppressed, right? You see that, for example, you have neighbors around you that want a piece of you, right? You are in a situation that feels like you've lost control of. You look at your market, right? And this is the best example for this reactive gameplay that I can give. You look at your market, and your market in the short view shows you the 3 most expensive and the 3 cheapest goods. When I talk to the people that were like, I don't know what's happening, something that commonly was always identifiable is that when they interacted with their economy, when they interacted with their market, they looked at that market icon of like 3 most expensive, 3 cheapest, and were like, I need to balance this. Because realistically speaking, in any other video game, in any other grand strategy game, when it's like, oh my god, this is expensive, oh my god, this is cheap, the inclination is to say, I need to make this more expensive. Like, I need to use it in more places, right? For example, let's say you have a product and that product is very, very cheap. Commonly, that means you want to implement it basically better into your supply chain. That does not hold true for Victoria 3. For Victoria 3, you may very well be looking at a good that you want to be expensive because it means you can export it, that you want to be expensive because it means that the people that, you are buying it from, let's say, for example, it's a government good, that they are making as much money as they can because you want them to make money because those are the people that you want to support. This complexity does not exist in other games, and it makes it so that people react to things rather than actively design what is happening. Let me introduce you to some of the things said at Paul Dupre's talk. Paul Dupre basically was just pointing out, okay, how do you start up a country? How do you start up an economy in Victoria 3? And for starters, you need to understand your country. And this is something that in any other game, you can largely avoid, right? Start playing EU4, I'll be honest with you. If you understand what is happening in EU4, if you know the rough mechanics, you might look at your mission tree. Obviously, you click all the buttons to like assign, certain things, blah, blah, blah. But like in general, you know what you need to do when you hop into a country, right? In Victoria 3, I believe firmly that you need to rid yourself of that habit of, oh, I know the mechanics, let me just jump in. You don't just need to understand the mechanics, you need to understand what your nation is. And I tried to bring this sort of, to bring this into the forefront earlier when we were talking about the quality of systems. You need to know what your resources are, what your population is, what your interest groups are, what your industry is, what your expansions on a market level can be, maybe, right? You need to know these things because otherwise engaging with the market will be purely reactive. You will see, oh my god, grain is very expensive, I need to expand that. If you do not have the knowledge how you're doing on that when you start the game, you will have a purely reactive, reaction-based gameplay. If you are starting as Austria and you have so many suppressed people, and you're not aware of this, you're not sure what this looks like, what is happening, you will be purely reactive. You will see the numbers of radicals shoot up, and you will say to yourself, I need to do something about this. Purely reactive gameplay is not fun. Victoria 3 is not purely reactive, but because of its complexity, it very, very quickly will seem as though it is if you are playing that game. Paul Dupre was talking about how you should sit down and you should, okay, what is my existing trade? What is my tax structure? What do my laws look like? Who is supporting what? Where am I? What is my damn country? You really need to take that time. I don't think you can get around it. Once you know it, though, you can jump into the same country over and over and over again. You don't need to spend that time. You know where that country is positioned. And then Paul said, okay, now you are in that country. And if you're not Belgium or Great Britain, who already are slightly, industrialized, you're looking at a country, surely, that is primarily subsistence farm-based. And this is something I think that most people didn't really look at from that context, because it's how would you, right? I understand that entirely. I think it's just so difficult to really get this ball rolling for Victoria 3. People being on a subsistence farm, what does that mean? That means that if you have an industry that wants to sell things to people, there's nobody that has money. There's just nobody that actually has the money to do it. So what do you do instead? The very first thing that is advisable, I think, and I think Paul the Pre was entirely correct that is like the thing that you should really, really do, is you sit down and you build a construction sector. Why? Because the construction sector, obviously, yes, you expand with it, but it doesn't actually matter what you really build with it, at least not initially. The fact of the matter is that construction sector consumes goods such as fabric or, you know, for example, lumber. It consumes both of those at the first, and then I think the second one is steel. I think it's steel, the second production. Who cares? Doesn't really matter. As soon as you have a construction sector, you have a way of directly funneling money from the state into the pockets of private pops. What I mean here is you build a construction sector, the people working there are obviously paid by you, they're being paid more than subsistence farms, and then when you start building, you will be using the goods, lumber, and, for example, fabric. And at that point, you build lumber and fabric buildings, and all of a sudden, the people using those buildings, working in those buildings, will be getting a bigger amount of disposable income, which means they will buy more, which means now you can start building factories, you can start building industries that are consumer-oriented, that are pop-oriented, pop-interest-oriented. This dynamic alone, it's so damn basic, because we haven't even talked about, okay, what are the longer supply chains? What exactly is happening here? Why are you going into this direction? But this dynamic alone is something that the people that were basically not really like, they weren't being taken in by the game and by the game systems, because they were looking at it and they said, well, I already have construction capacity, currently it's 0, let's just start building something. But to understand that you first need to build a market base that allows you to export or well, consume. Or for example, you don't even need a consumer base, right? If you have a place where you can export to, if you have a market that has a consumer base that you're a part of. These are the things that you need to know, because these are the levers that move you from here as your country to over there. And it's quite interesting to me because, again, this is a complete hit or miss with different people. I talked about this with some people were like, yeah, I get that. This is like the thing. Other people were like, honestly, like I see my market, my current situation writer, for example, tells me, hey, this government good is very expensive. And they go, all right, let's make it cheaper. Let's build more production sites of this, right? Victoria 3's major pitfall is giving the player the mentality of recognizing where they are at and where they want to take their society. Because without that mindset, you will be playing purely reactionary, well, not as a reactionary politically speaking, but in like a reactive gameplay style. And that is a game weakness. It should not be underestimated. The entry hurdle for Victoria 3 because of the complexity of the system is insane. Hear me out here, and we're going to get back to the accessibility, because this is, again, in my opinion, the main issue of approaching Victoria 3. Accessibility. Being able to know what is happening there, how you get there, what's in the way, everything going on there, right? When you play CK3, and you open the current situation writer, which is a number up top, right? Next to, like, the piety bar and whatnot. When you open the current situation writer, it will give you pretty basic stuff. It will say, hey, you can declare a war. You might want to do that. You can marry. You can educate one of your kids. You can, for example, give away a title. You got too many titles, man. You got to get rid of that. You have a lot of money. You might want to invest in a building. All of those things in the current situation writer are basically, hey, here's a thing that causes a potential action. Oh, wow, look at that. This is the effect this actually has. Isn't that? That's a straight line. I understand. Makes perfect sense. In Victoria 3, you might open up the current situation writer and discover that it tells you 4 government products are incredibly expensive, and you say to yourself, wow, but do I need to do something about this? And at that point, you are tasked with, okay, I'm going to click at this. Who's benefiting by it being expensive? Do I like this? Yes or no? Can I stem this cost? Is this a cost I want to stem? Yes or no? What can I do if I make this cheaper? Because it will make people that were earning so much money, they were being paid a lot by the government, right? It will make them poorer. Can I introduce something that relieves them? Cause and effect in Victoria 3 are not always connected. Most of the time, I would argue, they are not connected by a straight line. It's more like coming to actual and meaningful decision-making processes in Victoria 3 lies behind a pretty high hurdle. And I know that some of you might now go, well, yeah, I like that. Let's go, make it niche, right? But I personally, I have to tell you, obviously, I think the interest, I don't think accessibility, and I don't think giving somebody the gameplay feeling that lets them really enjoy the game is something that I think every game should strive for that, and I don't think it's something that will limit complexity. I think complexity can be insane, and you can be very accessible. I think, especially for the start, Victoria 3 is not. I think Victoria 3 is very difficult to grasp the first steps of. And for example, the idea that you build up with the construction sector, you build up the things that feed into the construction sector, then people all of a sudden have money, they can buy more, you can sell services, you can sell certain goods. You see the slide right here, right, that details when people buy what, that sort of thing, at what standard of living level. Knowing those things will all of a sudden open your third Victoria 3 eye, you know, that's why it's Victoria 3, of course, because you need your third eye to be open. And all of a sudden you can, boom bang, you know exactly what is happening. You look at a government good, you know, no, you can stay expensive. I don't care about this. What about this? You know what? I'm gonna have a job program in this location because I don't want to change the market right now, but I can be building up more barracks. Those barracks will employ people. Those people will work for me. So I got that under control. As soon as you understand it, trust me, it becomes so nice. It becomes so fluid. But overcoming that hurdle, I think, is something that people will be underestimating quite a bit. The gameplay feeling of Victoria 3 once you get there is really nice. To get there though can be tough. The first thing when it comes to the gameplay feeling that I would like to approach in that sense is 100%. Okay? Do the tutorial. Oh, I know, don't cry about it, okay? I know you played grand strategy games for 15 million hours and you're a god at them. Do the tutorial. The tutorial for Victoria 3 is excellent. It is very good. I mean, okay, I ran into a bug where, like, the window would never close again. But except for that, the actual mechanical functions of the tutorial are really good. Because the tell me how, the tell me why button, seriously, do not underestimate just how good they are in connecting the dots for you so that you then go, oh, yeah, okay, so that's the information I'm trying to look for here. I think the tutorial is a must-do for anybody that is a first-time Victoria 3 player, completely regardless of whether you are an experienced player with the game. If they give you a task, okay, I seriously, I did the tutorial, and I sat down, I did the tutorial after the Pull the Prey talk, so after I had already played a whole bunch, and I knew most of the things it would tell me how, tell me why, but the way the tutorial works is very dynamic. If you're like, I know this, it's like, just, okay, you just do what the tutorial asks for you, because it's just a normal playthrough. They're like, build up this building. Why don't you, you know, subsidize this building? You can do this if you already understand it, you're good to go, but other than that, it really explains how exactly you do this in the menus and why you might be doing this. And it acknowledges in so many ways, hey, you might want to do this in certain circumstances. In other circumstances, like X, Y, Z, you might not want to do this. Do the tutorial. It's a big way to get into the gameplay feeling for Victoria 3, because otherwise you will only be looking at situations such as, oh, my market, this is expensive, I will react. Oh, look at that, somebody is threatening somebody else in the Diplo play here, I will react. Sometimes you might go in a situation, oh, my radicals are here, I will react. No. Playing Victoria 3, more than ever, I think you want to be the active creator. And sometimes you will face challenges that as the active creator, because you didn't play optimally, you may not be able to overcome. But the fun and the main attitude in it lies in you saying, I know where I am, I want to go over there. It might fail, you might turn communist by accident, you might turn whatever, you know? My point is, this is an integral part of knowing why, when, and how you play the game. And do not underestimate the gameplay feeling. The systems themselves, if you can't grasp, if you don't understand how they are connected, will absolutely leave you in the state of, I don't know whether this game is good because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing these things, right? It's just happening. Most other grand strategy games are not as interconnected as this game, and when they tell you, hey, here's a thing that is actionable, they commonly do it in a way where this thing being actionable means you want to take an action because it's just that important. Think about the EU4 banners that pop up. Think about CK3 things in the current situation. Think about CK3 alarms. Think about Hoi Force telling you, hey, you are not researching something right now. That is an obvious actionable thing. But in Victoria 3, there might be situations where you're like, yeah, I know this is very expensive right now. I want it to be expensive, right? The complexity makes it so that an active playstyle is required, but also difficult to achieve if you don't know what it means to be active. And now with this, we come to the most fun part of this video, because after basically saying, so we have these great systems, and it will be difficult to engage with this, I want to tell you all the things that I don't like about the UX. So, the way I perceive Victoria 3 is that the UX is trying incredibly hard. The UX is doing whatever it can in its power at this current moment. I also think that flaws in the UX make it way, way harder to remain engaged in a game like Victoria 3 than, for example, a game like CK3 or EU4. If you can't connect the dots in CK3, that's fine, because tomorrow a character's gonna say, I'm angry, I'm gonna start a war anyway. It's fine, right? Like, you're gonna overcome the breakdown of communication between you and the game one way or another, because things are fairly direct. In Victoria 3, if you lose if you disconnect from what the UI is trying to tell you, you might never make it back in that playthrough, like on an understanding, on a mentality level. Again, as soon as you're more experienced, of course, it's a completely different story, but we're talking here about the very early thing. And I think the UX in Victoria 3 has an insane burden to carry because of this. I think the tutorial obviously is part of the user experience, so like that is a master stroke. But in play, there are a number of things where I say to myself, I think this rather hinders than actually engages the player. Yeah, let's just, I hope that I can find footage. I will work through this. I have a whole bunch here. I want to make this clear because I think that the more I complain about this, I think maybe the more does it also become apparent why I'm so concerned about the gameplay feeling as a hurdle for new players for Victoria 3. Right. When you start off playing the game, you have to, of course, understand your nation. You have to analyze your nation, right? And the pop browser for the individual states, for example, I really hope that I can show this. It is not good. Using the pop browser for the individual states gives you no actionable thing. Like, you can't, oh, look at this pop, this is something. No. The action that you can take to influence a pop is always elsewhere, because it's, for example, in the buildings, making the pop page itself actually quite useless. You will do better just looking at the, be it pie charts or the area charts, and pulling your conclusions from that. Actually looking at the pop list, I would never advise it in Victoria 3 as it is right now, because there's so much information to go through. Many of the pop stats, for example, like literacy, are not tracked in the same neat way that other pieces of information are tracked in Victoria 3. When Victoria 3, for example, is like, oh, your GDP, this is the curve, right? Literacy of a pop, literacy in your country, they're given as a number. You have the moment-to-moment situations of the area graphs as well. You know what would be cool? I'm just saying, and I don't think this is... I don't know whether this is viable. But, so I am a pie chart lover. But Victoria 3, because it's just so much easier to really keep track of everything, has sort of pushed me into the area chart direction. Now, you know what would be cool? If I look at a state or at my nation, and I look at an area chart, for example, of my pop types, right? Wouldn't it be cool if I had like a little bar where I could be like, this is where my pop types, what they look like at the start of the game. That's what they look like now. There you go, right? That would be cool, because right now, you look at them in the moment, you go like, okay, I guess we have a lot of peasants right here. Interesting, right? And that's what you do. If this became something where you can really nicely track your population, where you go like, oh my god, that is, look at how this was like this rural subsistence farming backwater territory, and all of a sudden, industrialized like crazy, everybody's dying to smog, but it is the industry of the century, let me tell you. Right now, the pop browser itself, not really viable. Wow, check it out. It's actually me from the future. I was editing this and I noticed that I didn't mention one of my favorite features that is a bit hidden under the UI as well, as we were talking about it, of course. And that is the feature of the AI diplomatic strategies, or well, the general strategies of the AI, I should say. It's a feature that I know most people that I actually talked to at PDXCON were not aware of, but that I was basically guided by the entire time. So I think I have footage here, or at least a screenshot that shows this, and it's at the bottom of one of the screens if you look at a different country. You can see that screen itself doesn't doesn't really have any actionable, options there either. It just gives you general information about the country. And I have to tell you, I absolutely love the strategies. For example, I was looking at Prussia and Austria when I was playing Sweden, right? And Austria declared, I want to just balance, or I want to preserve the balance of power, while Prussia, I should say, actually said, I want to unify Germany. Now then, at some point, I actually had joined the Prussian market. I had, indeed joined them. I worked very closely together with Russia itself. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was the fact that Austria may have recovered or discovered, nationalism at that point. I'm not actually sure what triggered it, and I think that's part of the mystery. But Austria at some point switched to unify Germany. You may have seen this screenshot right here. It shows that Austria has eaten Bavaria, and I can tell you that I was, before they ever did that, before they ever moved in on that Diplo play, I could have told you that they were going to do something like this because they had switched the AI strategy. Every 5 years or so, I was basically just checking in with people that were interesting to me and so on, whether they had altered any of their AI strategies. It's really cool stuff. I like it because, for example, Britain was like, I want to establish a trade empire. France was like, I want to, just largely preserve the balance of power and push liberal forces worldwide. I really, really enjoyed that because it made it so beyond rivalry, beyond general, likelihood to join a diplomatic play. It made it so that I would then immediately be aware of, okay, wait a minute, Austria wants to now unify Germany, so now I know that they and Prussia will be clashing in the nearby future. And that was, of course, incredibly important. I think most people miss that. So as much as I like that feature, I do think that ultimately, it's one of the examples, again, where the UI definitely needs to tell you something and sort of doesn't in the moment at the very least. So yeah, that's just me checking in. I completely forgot about that. I love that feature, but I also knew that most people weren't even aware of it. So I hope that you... this is good enough. Back to old me. The building map mode, right. And again, please take this in a way where I'm like, I just think that it's an extra entry hurdle. I think again the UI is actually carrying so much. I had the great pleasure of talking to the UX guy that was present, Aaron. A really, really great guy. So much expertise in there as well. You can really feel the love of trying to make this game as accessible as possible. It's just in play. I definitely felt that there were some shortcomings, right? I talked a lot about it. I was really excited for this conversation as well. It was really good. In the building map modes, when you, and I think I have footage for this, when you are in the lens, right, because the lenses are a new introduction as well that is meant to give you an easy way to do certain things that will steer your country into a certain direction. When you have the lens for building open, what you will see is every state in the world, I think it should be more limited, but it doesn't really matter. Every state in the world will give you their information about how many unemployed people are there, how many subsistence farmers are on this territory. That information is goddamn crucial because it really lets you know, oh, wait a minute, this is currently a societal hotspot. This thing's not looking good, right? Really excellent. What that does, as soon as you click on a building, let's say, for example, I want to build a glass manufacturing building, that number pop-up that was over every state on the map goes away entirely. If you're a big country, basically, you have two phases where you look around and you go okay, wait a minute, what's happening here? Am I still doing well? And obviously, yes, they can migrate from this location to that other location to work there, but fundamentally, that piece of information is so good and it goes away as soon as you select a building, and then that building just shows you its profit margin values, which in itself, by the way, of course, how are you going to depict this in any better way? But it's also those profit margin values often don't mean anything because as you're building things, you will then change the consumption of whatever those buildings are producing. It's just so damn complex. I hope you understand why I'm the UX is trying. It's trying so damn hard, but man, building a couple of buildings will change everything about the map that you're being shown. But fundamentally, this is one of those shortcomings where I just say to myself, this information is pertinent to what the player is doing. The player needs that information. The player needs to be able to look at that and say, okay, I still have so many subsistence farmers left. If I build this up right here, they can just stay in that state as well and just relax there, right? Subsistence farmers basically are unemployed earlier, just for the record. They work on subsistence farms. Usually, most jobs in a profitable building, well, actually, I think all jobs in a profitable building will always earn more than subsistence farms. But yeah, that information is so vital and it just goes away. The outliner is the weirdest thing to me. Outliners are what you have on the right side. You can see it up there, I think. And it shows you things such as, oh, these are the percentages of your interest groups. This is your market. These are other markets that you might be in. This is your army, your admirals. etc., right? The outliner, and I'm pretty sure most players that I talked to did not realize this, the outliner in itself at the start of the game only contains, I think, your market and your armies. If you go to the very left, and I hope that I have this footage, you can click on a button that is like any other button that brings you into a specific menu, and that button only exists to reveal a menu that lets you highlight things that then go into the outliner. That's the only thing it does. And I really hope it won't be in 1.0. I really hope so, because, man, it's so cumbersome, because no matter what information you actually need from your outliner, you can always minimize it, obviously, right? But most people, I swear to God, were not aware that they had to click on that menu to open the outliner favoritism menu and then actually put it in their menu. I don't know where the issue there is. I just wish that, like, you basically could right-click your outliner and then activate and deactivate what you want to see. I guarantee you that had more players, because right now the way it felt to many players that I talked to was basically that, like, they were playing the game and they were like, oh, I need to check my politics screen every now and again to check how my politics are doing, are my interest groups doing alright, right? When I played, I always tracked my interest groups in the outliner, and I could tell, oh, wait a minute, there must have been a big shift, because last time I looked, the landowners were the biggest faction. What happened? Then you go into the politics screen. Much less babysitting, but that outliner, it's so oddly hidden. Now, of course, there are also certain statistics. Again, I talked about the literacy rate. I just got it written here. I already mentioned this, basically, where it's like, for some things, I wish time-tracked sort of stats existed, and I think they're important so that you understand whether you're doing it right or not, right? Yeah, for individual pops, again, in particular for individual pops, you will never open that individual pop window. I guarantee you this. Unless you really want to, like, oh, I wonder what happened to this. But even then, there's just not that much information. You can't really take any actions based on this. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. I feel like a big chunk of why I play Victoria 3, and I'm positive, really positive about the gameplay systems and how they interact, but a big chunk was to just like, oh, look at that, these pops have been doing like this, blah, blah. That is not fully supported by the UX as is. What the hell does this mean? Oh, right. Another thing, for example, and this, it's so very odd. Most of the things that I dislike here, you may notice, are actually the lens menus. But if you look at the trade lens and you want to do an import or export route, I mean, look at this, right? It's and I say this in the hope that I'm going to edit this in later, right? But look at this. It's like the trade goods, they're not really sorted. They're just hanging out there. You need to scroll through to get to the other trade goods. You need to look for the good that you're looking for. And yeah, it's just like, I think most people that played the game stayed away sort of from trade, because it's like, man, and the actual trade menu itself, also very, very difficult to navigate. You need to, like, right-click the trade route that exists, and then it says stop trading with that market, and I thought to myself, stop trading that good or stop trading that market. Does it mean all of the market or all of the goods, or is it just this trade route, and it's just that trade route? The UI there can be very cumbersome. I don't think that the tile size is necessary. I don't think that the tile size and the lenses is required. I don't think it adds anything. No search function can make it quite difficult. And when you do a new trade deal, when you do it, right, it doesn't, to my knowledge, tell you where that trade center that manages that trade actually is. Which maybe I'm just blind. Who knows, right? In a game this complex, you will often overlook something. I did not spot anything there to make it easy, but it's so important, because you will learn, okay, this trade center is now there, which means that that is from where the trade route goes. I need to protect X and Y. I need to take a look at the workers that are in that trade center. I need to, when I cancel this trade route, those workers, if the profitability of the trade center goes down, those workers may all of a sudden, like, have a massive standard of living loss, and that screws me over because it screws them over, and with that creates radicalism in my society, right? Those are things that you can't, like, I needed to click manual states to find the damn buildings, that sort of stuff. Yeah. I also think that yeah, the state pop overview is something I already mentioned. The current situation thing, I don't think you can overcome that. And again, I talked a lot to the devs there, and again, super well, sort of like they have so many super interesting considerations. It's just for a game like Victoria 3, you have to admit that, like, the current situation writer in particular, right? You can't make that information straightforward. You can only look at, okay, this is information that the player may need, that may be pertinent to them, but it's not comparable to CK3, right? The entry hurdle there, I mean, again, there's a lot that we can talk about where it's like practical UI issues. What does this look like? Again, when it comes to Warfare, it's very, very rough. It's super rough to actually keep track of anything there. But in general, the current situation, I don't know whether the current situation rider can be fixed. And I've come to the rambling stage of this video, I'm noticing now. Before that, I tried to make points, and now I'm just like, okay, what is the issue with the UI here and there? The current situation is just, since none of the information, since all of the systems are so damn complex, none of the information is actually straightforward. But current situation as a concept, I feel, kind of needs like straightforward information, right? Yeah, I don't think that feature will coast you, or will let you coast the same way that the CK3 rider does it. I firmly still to this day believe that if you play CK3, you've never played it before, and you have the current situation rider, and you look at that, that will tide you over. You can declare wars, you can bribe people, you can take money from the Pope, you will generally have a pretty good time playing the game. Victoria 3? No. The current situation rider does not save you. It does not do it. There are also some things about migration attraction, right? I would have, like, trade deals in general can be difficult to trace on the map. The on-map graphics are very chaotic in a way. The lived migration, so like, okay, what actually happened here? I would like to see some more migration flow. Maybe you can see it if you hover over some certain things. I didn't see it. I just saw the migration attraction in general. But yeah. I'd like to just see some retroactive, or rather some backwards looking information on certain things like migration, like for example, a pop, you know, how their standard of living developed in this particular situation. That sort of stuff I would like to see tracked, but yeah, be that as it may. Again, the Warfare UI, not a fan of it. Not a fan of it at all. It's just that, and this is something that definitely like can be tweaked, right? But as you zoomed out, the menus would just all stay plastered and go over each other instead of becoming like a different size or a different form. Navigating wars was just very difficult. Once you had the information that you wanted, really cool what was going on there, how you can, okay, this is what my society does, this is why I'm losing this front line. For example, I was losing a front line against Prussia because they had better production methods. I started gearing around and changed my production methods where I was fighting the Ottomans, because the Ottomans didn't have a good production method, and I needed to stop Prussia. So I geared that around. I had a couple of weeks that were not that good because it takes time to change the production method, and then all of a sudden we were able to withstand them, right? It's just that like the actual information there, it's like when you look at a battle statistic, for example, that thing's chaos, man. Like that's a lot of information, and very little of that information I felt personally was actionable, making it so that I couldn't really go hard on that to really sort of min-max the makeup of the units in that particular frontline, or at that frontline. The tutorial, absolutely outstanding. I already said this in the past. I had a bug, but who cares? The tutorial was so good in really giving me the mindset of like, yeah, okay, so this does that, meaning this connects here and there, boom, you got it, right? The predicted value stuff, really, really good. Obviously, it doesn't really always hold true, okay? The predicted value, this will change, obviously, as the market changes, but fundamentally, a huge, huge boon. Really, really good. Yeah. There was another thing that I want to bring up here, for example, the law screen. When you look at that, when you change a government, or when you like are in a government and you got laws, right? So you can only initiate a law if any given interest group in your government supports that law. Now, if you have a coalition of, let's say, 2 or 3 interest groups, and they are quite diverse, you may have 30 laws that you could potentially attempt to pass. And they are depicted in a way where it's like, you need to scroll like crazy. Yeah, I think UX real estate of information is something Victoria 3 in the version that I played struggled with. The laws were massive. The lenses had instances of like it cuts off here and you can't tell exactly what is going on there. Some of the reactive map modes were there when you were looking at it, then you clicked something and you still wanted that map mode and it went away. I firmly believe, wait, let me just finish off the section here. Let me grab this right here. What the hell did I write here? Ah, right. The value chain. The value chain of things can be a bit obtuse. I think it would be nicer if like you got a general overview, obviously. So in a supply chain, right, in a production chain, you may have a situation where certain goods are not actually being used or produced in this building, despite the building being capable of doing it, right? So you don't, the production chains are so diverse in how they can like split up and whatnot that like it's difficult to depict it. But I do think as of right now, if I look at a building and it consumes something that was produced after using something else to produce it, so it's like the third stage of production, right? I have to manually like click through the buildings that are involved in the production chain here to see how all of the related goods are doing. When you are at your market, you have certain types of goods, like staple goods, blah, 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 blah. It would be really neat, I think, if there was a view that showed you... You click on a good, basically, and then it shows you the prices of the goods used in all supply chains of this good active on the market. What do I mean here? I mean, for example, sometimes you might need TNT, dynamite, right, to mine. Right? And if you don't use it, it shouldn't show up on that screen because it's not used, meaning this isn't the good that drives up the price of the middle stage good, which then drives up the cost for the last good. I hope you can follow me. It's very absurd to even talk about it in this way without me being able to like do it on screen. But as soon as you use dynamite, right, in your production focus, in your production chain, it should be depicted there. This is a very complex screen, don't get me wrong here, but right now you basically need to explore your entire production chain yourself, and to see where things get expensive or not, you need to like track it all manually. I really, at least from what I can tell, I wish that was was altered there, the value chain basically being depicted in a much clearer and applicable way. Rather than theoretically, this is where this can be used. Theoretically, this is being used here, right? I would like a practical per-market overview. Then the tech UI, I don't think the tech UI is bad. I just think it really needs a search bar. I had a requirement for one of my journal entries, and I said to myself, where the hell is this tech? And it was a fairly late tech, which made it worse because obviously you start looking from up top, right? I think the tech UI desperately needs a search bar. Trade. Right. Trade, yeah. The trade UI in the lens, really not good in my opinion. And then the trade UI, when you look at the... well, from its information value, it's really not good because it's difficult to, like... You need to identify the good that you're looking for. It's rough. It's really tough to navigate that. And then the actual trade UI, you know, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of that could be significantly smaller, and I know that there's UI scaling. I don't think it corresponds one-to-one with the issue here, though. I think it could be smaller, and it could make it so that, like, more of the pertinent information is shared, rather than, for example, the fairly big image of the trade good. I hope that I can show it. Just, like, if you change around, basically, how the real estate is being utilized, I think you would have a significant gain there in usability for the player. My point of this whole segment, because this last segment was basically the culmination of all of this, right? There are 3 steps here to come to the conclusion, and my god, I need to cut this. There are 3 steps here. The first step is, do the systems work? My personal answer is, from what I have seen, these systems produce results that you can logically trace if you understand the basis of what is going on, but more importantly, the systems individually and together work in a fashion that is so interlocked, so interwoven, so interconnected. You will... It's incredible. It is absolutely incredible. The issue with these systems is, as good as a system can be, there is an entry hurdle, and that entry hurdle is, of course, getting the mindset. So actually getting into the mindset of, okay, what is this game? I don't think this is a game. You know, the way I play CK3, I sit down and I say, I don't have a plan, I don't do anything. I just sit down, I want to see who my character is, and then I'm going to do whatever I think my character might do, right? I think Victoria 3, obviously on the fly, you can change your goals, you can pivot around, you can do certain things. If you fail, try something else, right? Like go into a different direction, it never hurts. However, I do think Victoria 3 necessitates, if you don't just want to do reactive gameplay, where you go like, oh, wait a minute, these people are angry now, let's try to make them happy. No, you need to... you need to start to understand where your country is to begin with and where your country might be able to go, because only then can you do active, proactive gameplay. Otherwise, you will always be reactive, and I think that is something that many new players will be running into. I saw this as a hurdle. I talked to the devs about it, and the general thing that I can say that puts me at rest here is that they know this is a hurdle. Obviously, they want to address it as much as they can, but they sounded quite confident in being a niche game. And that is not all that often. I mean, CK3 coming from CK3, coming from Hoi 4, those games are played on a massive scale in many ways. CK3 is just so easy to attract people that don't just like grand strategy, but that like roleplay, that like characters and so on, that like the personal stories, you know, that sort of thing. CK3 has the huge potential when it comes to the appeal there. Victoria 3 does not, and Victoria 3 has a bunch of challenges that also address this. But again, I am confident because the devs very much are aware of this, and the devs appear quite confident that that is fine. You know, like, that is just okay sometimes. You don't make games that are for everybody, and sometimes you make games that may be a niche, but that work so well in that niche that you come out on top. I certainly hope so. The second part of this is, of course, that even if you accept that you are in a niche, you don't want to tighten that niche needlessly. You want to broaden that by making the UI more accessible. I think right now the UI stumbles over its own feet in certain places. In certain places, there's just windows that are basically, there's nothing actionable. There's just, again, this pop browser. It's so damn long, for example. I love browsing pops, don't get me wrong here, but that one, it's quite difficult to navigate that and get any value out of it in a way. The outliner, I don't fully understand, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. I think it more comes down to how do you onboard a new player, even after the tutorial, when they're not sure what the hell they actually need to do, where they want their society to be, how they get that society there, and so on. It is an incredibly complex game. I had a great time playing it. I hope that I identified the issues. If you're a player that says, I could not overcome these issues, maybe wait before you jump into Victoria 3, watch some other people play it, you know, that sort of thing. But gameplay-wise, mechanically speaking, I'm very impressed by the game. I just think that, and rightfully so, because again, of how complex it is, I think the tutorial is a new level of tutorials from Paradox, but I do think the UI issue will be accompanying Victoria 3 until the end of time. I think the density and connectivity of information necessitates that. I don't think you can escape it. Again, I talked to at least one of the UX designers. I know that there are more than just that one, but I also have to tell you, I think they do excellent work for what they have. I just think, practically speaking, there are some things where you look at it and you go like, what is happening here? And ultimately, that is guaranteed. Victoria 3 doesn't give you, you know, if CK3 has bad UI somewhere, doesn't give you all the information you need, it's like a tidbit of information that you need, right? For example, CK3 doesn't tell you, oh, hey, this ally of your enemy currently is at war, they're not going to come to their aid because they have their own war, so, hey, don't calculate that in. If you can finish the war easier, it's over, right? CK3 doesn't tell you that, but that's such a tiny chunk of information that CK3 doesn't give you. The impact is negligible. Victoria 3, my god, make any mistakes UI-wise, and that game is like, yeah, but you forgot about the 15 things this mechanic is connected to. Haha, you just got dunked on. It's rough. UX design for Victoria 3 is difficult. Very difficult. It already does a whole lot of heavy lifting. I just think that the entry hurdle still remains quite high. This is it. I am done. I'm going to try to find the footage now that I'm looking for, and I'm probably going to cry while doing that. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I will see you in hell. Shout out to anybody that has worked on the game. It's a remarkable project, I think, in many ways. How it actually will turn out in terms of the end product, the 1.0 product, and the post-release product. I'm eager to see. This was just my feedback, my impression when it comes to the game. Again, the full evaluation, like in like how do the systems hold up long term? Does the UI become something that you forget about after 50 hours of play or whatever? I can't tell you. This is after the time that I did have with the game. See you later, alligator.